Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Zamzam. I know you all are very hungry and can't wait to get out and have lunch, but bear with me. We're going to get through this, and then we're all going to go and have some good lunch. So a little bit about me is that I've been doing iOS since 2015. So I've done, I started with Objective-C, moving with Swift, and then SwiftUI, a lot of other things. And so it's been quite a journey. Right now, I work at a company called VO Technologies. It's based in Copenhagen. We do have offices other places in the world, and it is a sport tech company. So we do have like these AI cameras that like record football games. So I do watch a lot of football as part of my job. I was not a football fan. I mean, it was like, yeah, whatever. It's like that was my intention. So I watched Ted Lasso. So the funny thing that Simon had gives from Ted Lasso, I watched Ted Lasso as an educational show, more of like a comedy show. I had my colleagues explaining me what's Premier League and Champions League and like how different they are. So yeah, I'm still learning. But this year, I had the honor to be nominated as one of the persons in the Women Who Code Technologies to Watch. So I'm very honored to be listed among those amazing technologists. And I'm here today to talk to you about serverless computing and the power of cloud functions. So Grady had said the functions of a good software is to make the complex to appear to be simple. And to me, that's exactly what Cloud Function is doing. It's making something complex, and then it kind of makes it super easy and super simple. As mobile engineers, I think we've all had our share of number of API calls. So like we have our backend engineers, like, oh, it's just like 6 API calls. Like, what's the big deal? Just make it happen in the app. And then we have to handle a lot of business logic, which makes it a bit difficult because then you have to make an app update every time it changes. And then you have this implementation in multiple places. You do it in iOS, you do it in Android, you do it in frontend, web frontend. Then we end up keeping a lot of local data. So sometimes it's just like, why can't you just save it on the apps? I mean, like, why do you need an API for this? Then we have data security, so you end up having some secrets in your code, and even though iOS makes it super difficult for people to basically extract data from your code, but it's still possible, so then you have that. And then push notification, so this is something that like you need a server for this, unless you want to just do like an advertisement kind of notification. If you want to have something built into it, you need to have a server. And then proper error handling. I mean, how many of you had this thing that you had to deal with multiple APIs, and then they all had kind of different errors that they gave you? Like, one of them had a status, one of them didn't have a status, one of them had a message, one of them didn't have a message. So, like, these are all the pains. I think you all have some experience with this. So, how many of you actually wish that you could be able to do some of this work, like backend work, so that you wouldn't have to do it on your apps? Just raise your hands. Okay, great. So how many of you do or did or want to do backend code? Okay, so I hope that by the end of it, most of you would actually want to give it a try. So what are usual blockers? So this is from personal experience. So for me, every time I wanted to do backend code, I had this like, okay, I don't know where to start. It's just like a lot of things that I have to know, and then there are a lot of take a stack. Which one do I choose? And then I would go into this rabbit hole of research. Oh, like, what is this? What is that? And then I ended up like spending a day not figuring out what to choose. And then I have the thing with you basically don't know how to like deploy or maintain a project. I didn't, and I just thought, okay, this is just way too much. This is too complicated. I cannot do this. But this is where Cloud Functions come to the rescue. So the thing that Cloud Function does. So what is Cloud Function? Cloud Function is a serverless framework, which means that a lot of things is basically taken care of. So you don't have to deal with servers and a lot of things. So everything is kind of automatic. It runs on event triggers. So I will talk about this later on, but what it means is that you need to have an event to trigger a function. So this event could be multiple things. It could be your app calling the function, or it could be like an event happening somewhere in Firestore or cloud storage. Your code is stored in a Google Cloud panel, so like it's like on a cloud and it's safe. You don't need to do any maintenance. So the maintenance is actually like you don't need to do anything. Everything is done for you. And then it's private and secure because it's hosted on a server on a GCP. So like you don't have to worry about like having keys and secrets in there. And then you can deploy it with one line of code. You see this a lot in this presentation. And it integrates well with Firebase offerings, but one of them is cloud messaging, so like push notification, which is what I use it for. And then you can run intensive tasks, which means like if you have something that needs like a huge amount of process, then you can basically just run that code on a function, and your app doesn't have to deal with it. And then it integrates well with a lot of third-party APIs, and there is a huge list for that. And then last year they announced the Cloud Function second generation. So this year, last year was in beta release, but this year it's like now in full release. The big differences for this is that so there is something that they call concurrency, which lets you to run up to 1,000 concurrent requests per function. It used to be 1, so that's a huge change. The other thing is that the functions can have like an hour like for timing out. Before it was 9 minutes. Then you have a fewer cold starts. And what cold start is, because these functions are triggered or like are activated based on the times you call the functions, then sometimes when you don't call the function, then they go to this state of like shutting off. So the very first time that you need to call it, then it takes like a few, it takes a longer time to come on and like turn on. So what they improved in the second gen is that they improved this cold start, so you have fewer of them. You have larger instance sizes, which allows you to do more intensive tasks. And then there are new trigger types like crash leaks, velocity alerts, and the list goes on. There is a lot. And then they actually announced the better support for Python. So this is in beta, but it's really cool that they're improving, like adding more languages to it. So I hope by this time I kind of convinced you that like you want to know at least how it works. The quick start. So for those of you who just want to see how it works, like you don't want to install anything on your computer, you don't want to go through the whole hassle of like installing Node and all of that, then there is a quick guide in Google Cloud panel that basically takes 5 minutes to go through it, and then you just deploy a first hello world function. And I highly recommend you to at least try this because it will show you how it works, and it's very simple. And then we have Firebase CLI, and it's not, I want to say it's not as cool as what Paul showed you yesterday, but it is still really nice. I think it's very powerful, and it makes a lot of things much easier. So what you need to do is that you need to create a Firebase project, and you need to install Node.js and Firebase CLI, and you need to initialize your project with JavaScript or TypeScript. You're gonna see some TypeScript code in this slide. I'm not gonna lie to you, but since you managed to get through Alex's talk yesterday with all those maths, I think you'll manage. It's not as complicated. So these are the commands you need to run, and to be honest, these are the commands, but sometimes when you're running these things, you might fall into some problems, but then you just kind of have to figure out how to get through. But if any of you are trying this out and then you found some problems, just let me know. I'll be happy to help you get through it. So now that we have the setup, let's write some functions. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to write some functions code, and we're going to test it. So we're going to test if the function works locally. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to deploy it. So project structure using TypeScript. So the project structure is that you have something like this when it happens, and what this is so when you call Firebase init functions, it would basically create like a folder for you, and it's like an Xcode project, and then a lot of things are already there, like added to the project. It will ask you whether you want to do it with TypeScript or JavaScript. I suggest you do with TypeScript, but up to you. And then, so this is the index.ts file is actually the main file that we're gonna talk about today, because the rest you basically don't need to touch, at least not for the first go. Of course, if you want to have like a complex project, you want to have like a good architecture around it, like how it is with iOS. Like this is, let's put everything in view controller and just make it work. And then we're gonna figure out how to make it clean later. So the first TypeScript code, don't worry, I'm gonna walk you through it. It's not that bad. So this is the HTTPS callable function. So basically, we're creating a function called user is legal, and then we're having this on-call function, which is HTTPS callable function. It is slightly different than normal HTTPS functions, and the main difference between it is that you can call this function from the Firebase SDK. I'm going to talk about it a bit more later on, but just know that you can have on-call, which makes them callable functions, and you can have on requests, which makes them normal HTTP functions. And the good thing about on-call, and if you're using the Firebase SDK in your iOS or Android app, is that like you get this context. So if you're using Firebase Authentication, it basically, you don't need to do anything in the app. When you're calling the function, everything is kind of set to the function automatically. We're not going to talk about that now, so we're going to talk about the data sent from the client. So the data is the data that the client is sending to your function. So here in this case, what this function, the point of this function is to get a name and family name of a user, a birth year, and then figure out if the user has a legal age or not. And you know, this is the legal age is different in different countries, so it would be so like it's basically handling some business logic for you. Then you can do some error handling. This is very basic. And for those of you who are like expert in TypeScript, don't hold me to these codes. I think like I don't call myself as an expert in TypeScript. I just like do the code that to get me by. And then the business logic. So this is, I have like I abstracted this one because it's just like a normal age check. So I'm calling this function to say, okay, if the user has a legal age or not. And then we're going to return the result. And in this case, we're returning a JSON file, which is like we're putting the name and family name as a full name, and then a Boolean, which is says if the user has a legal age or not. So now I'm going to talk about Firestore. So what Firestore are, there are NoSQL document-based documents. What it means is, for those of you who have experience with SQL and NoSQL, the big difference between the two is that the NoSQL databases, you don't have relations, so everything is like a collection, and then you have documents inside a collection, and then you can have the collection inside a document, and the document can be very different. So you can have, in one you can have name and a birth year and an age, and then in the other one you can have a name and address. So it's like you don't have to have certain fields in them. It's like very open to different things that you want to put in them. And it provides a flexible and scalable data model, so like you can have nested data, and it is pretty cool. So if for those of you who have worked with SQL databases, this is like a lot of times like there is a talk, okay, should we go with NoSQL or SQL? But Firestore is NoSQL, and then it has a real-time updates. So those of you who have used Firestore, you know that you can use it for real-time updates between for your application. So if you have like you need to have like real-time getting data, then you can use this. And it is compatible with web, iOS, and Android, which makes it super cool when you're working on multi-platform. So writing to Firestore, this is like, see, it's not that long. It's a few lines of code. So this is, again, another HTTP callable functions, so that adds the username. And then in this case, I'm just sending a name. And this is what you use to write to Firestore. So the admin is the Firestore admin SDK, and then what this code is doing is I say, make a collection of messages. So you name the collection messages, and then you say, okay, add a document that has a content of the name. And what we're turning back here, I'm just turning back the document ID, because when a document is created in Firestore, it automatically gets a unique ID. So I'm turning back the document ID, which makes it that like the user can later use that ID to retrieve the document. And triggering function on Firestore trigger. So far, the functions that I showed you, they were like you can call them through the apps or any other way that you like from web platform as well. You can call the functions, and then the function gets triggered, and something happens. In this case, the function starts running when a document is added to the Firestore. So what you can do, what makes the Cloud functions very useful, especially when you're using other Firebase functionalities, is that you can have these events that would trigger based on the creation of a document, deletion of a document, like an update of the document. So here I'm saying like every time a document is added to the messages collection, I want to do something with it. So what I'll do is that, so the snap is the document that has been saved, so I'm retrieving that. And what I want to do is that I want to create a short name. So in the previous one, we added the full name. What I want to do here is I want to create the short name from that name. So this is how I'm doing it. So I create the short name and I'm uppercasing it, and then I'm saving it back to the Firestore. So this is, in this case, so I'm saying, okay, now add this extra field to the Firestore document. And the merge true at the end will make it as an update. And if the document for some reason doesn't exist, it will create a new one. So in this case, it does exist. So what else can you use Cloud Functions for? So you can call external APIs, for instance, like OpenAI or Palm API, which is for Google. And if you go to their documentation page, this is based on OpenAI, so they have a list of examples of different things you can call or different functions you can request. And then the cool thing about, well, like you might wonder, oh, why do I need to do that? Like I can't do it from the apps, and you can. But then again, there is also like the security. So you know, like OpenAI has this like static secret token. If you put it in the app, then your secret is basically in the app. Whereas if you put it in Cloud Functions, then it's stored on cloud securely. Cost control. So in some case, you could do rate limiting. A lot of things you can do with the Cloud Functions that like basically manages the cost, and it's easier to update and maintain. So let's say the OpenAI changes their API. So with this, you can actually just update your functions without having to touch your app. So here an example. So in this one, you have to initiate the OpenAI API with the configuration, which basically just has the key, like the API key. And this function is not a callable function. If you see, it's just like a normal function. But this is like a helper function that I wrote to use it in my callable function. So this is the OpenAI model that I'm using. And this is the part that I'm calling the OpenAI. And this part of the code is basically in their document. I think they have TypeScript, and they have a lot of other languages as well. But like this is what they have, so you could just basically take and put it in and try out different things with it. In this case, I'm giving it a URL, and I want it to give me a summary of that URL. So it will basically give like a few line summary of what the URL is like for an article or something, and then it will give me a summary of that. So it gives you a collection of results usually, and then I'm getting the first one. I'm just trimming it and returning the result. And if the summary doesn't exist, then I'll just return an error saying no summary available. So here is the actual callable function that we can call it from our apps. So the summarize URL callable function. So by now, you should be familiar with this syntax on call, which makes it a callable function. And here in the data part, we are actually sending the URL as the data, and then we're calling the function that I showed you in the previous slide, so the summarize URL, and then returning the summary back to the users. So you could use this for any other API calls that you want to do to any external platform. So this is just an example. OK, so we got through the TypeScript code. So for those of you who really want to see and do all of this in Swift, go here and vote for Swift. So there is a Firebase request to the Firebase team to basically add the support for Swift to the cloud functions. So go and vote for it. I think the more vote they get, they would hopefully prioritize this sooner. I'll give you a few seconds for those of you who want to scan and vote. OK, moving on. So let's test it. OK, you might wonder why I have this, like save your code. But the thing is, not all IDEs have autosave, or at least like not by default. And then if you don't save your code, then you don't see the result. I spent some good time on this, so that's why you see it over there. And then you cd to your function, so I use VS Code. And then the nice thing about it is that it has like a tiny terminal over there, so you can do all of these commands right from the VS Code. And then you run npm run serve. What npm run serve does is it's exactly like command R in Xcode. So it basically builds and runs your functions on an emulator. Again, when you're running this for the very first time, you might have this thing that, OK, it might, like you might hit some errors that you need to install the emulator, and then there are some steps that you need to go through. I really wanted to like deinstall everything and reinstall everything back to figure out what was those errors, but also I didn't want to do that. So if you have any questions regarding these steps, just feel free to contact me. And then this is what you see when you get like a success result. So here is all the list of on top, all the list of the functions. So the functions that we just created, and then you have a URL that says like is for the UI of the emulator, and then you see that on the emulator we have functions and Firestore activated. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is what it looks like on an emulator UI. So you see that there is a lot of emulators that we are not using. In this case, we're just using the Firestore emulator and functions emulator. So calling the function with Postman or any other thing that you use. I just really like Postman, so I use Postman. So in this case, we're giving a name and family name of Taylor Swift with 1989. And then the result is Taylor Swift and is legal age is true. So this is, you can use any other thing to check your function. So you can see the URL is actually from my local machine. And then it's the URL that you saw from the previous slide. So it gives you the URL that the function is activated on. OK, how to call your functions from the app. And here, I mean from the emulator. Oh, no, actually, so that's a different thing. So how you can call functions from the app. So one of them is call functions via HTTP requests, which is like normal HTTP requests with URL session and all of that. The other part is with callable functions. So that's with using Firebase Cloud Function SDK in the app. And we're going to see some Swift code. Yeah? Show a little bit of excitement. Nice. So this is some Swift code. So I'm not going to show you how to add Firebase to the project. I think most of you have done that once or twice or many more times so far. But like here, we're using the Firebase function. So you're going to import the SDK. And this is how you're going to call the function. And the nice thing is that you can just call it like a normal Swift function. You just give it the name of, for instance, in this case, we're calling user is legal. And then you pass the request model and the response model. And another nice thing about it is that you can actually use Codable for this. So everything is like purely Swift and iOS functions. And that's how it is. So here, that's when you wanna run, like basically test your app towards your functions, but locally. So here in the previous slide, I'm just gonna quickly go back. You see that there is a functions.functions on the top. So this is how you access function. So if you wanna, I'm gonna go through these. If you wanna just use the emulator, then you're just gonna say use emulator, localhost, and the port. So that's the port that your functions are running. You can do this for Firestore and other things that you're using from the emulator. So it makes your app to call the local environment rather than the Firebase on production. Then this is what the logs look like. So you can see that in this case that I called the function, I don't have any verification because I was not using the Firebase authentication, so the verification is missing. But if you are, the nice thing about it is that when you add that line of code, you don't need to do anything extra. It would automatically add it to your request, and you'll get it on the server. And this is what the Firestore emulator looks like. So this is what I'm going to try this. Okay, do you see it? No, okay. So it's like it has the collection. So that we created like a messages collection, and you can see that currently it has 2 documents in it. And you can do a lot with emulator. So for instance, if you don't want to populate your emulator every time, you can like inject data to it. You can export data from it. So there is a lot you can do here. This is just like the very basics. Deployment. So now we're gonna get to the deployment. So the deployment, I've been talking about it a lot since the beginning, so it's no surprise to anyone, I hope, that you can deploy it with 1 line of code. And this is the line. So you could just say Firebase deploy only functions, and that's it. It'll take a few minutes, and then it's done. So you have the deployment complete. And then you can see it says that you can check out your functions in the Firebase console. So let's do that. So when you go to the Firebase console, I think like this is very familiar to most of you. So there is that function bit over there. I'm gonna try this one. Yeah, okay, this works. So this functions bit over here, and then you also have a Firestore. Okay, it's not in this. Oh yeah, it's up there. Firestore database. So you can see the list of your functions. You can see the like a usage of them, and you can get more info if you go to GCP. So there is like a lot more info there. This is just like a very brief overview of like your functions. And this is the Cloud Firestore, which looks a lot like the emulator, but this is on actually after you deploy your functions and you start using the Firestore. This is what you see. And pricing. So you might think, okay, this is, I hope that by now I was like, oh, this is all great and nice, but how much does it cost? So the thing is, if you want to use a Firebase Firestore or functions, you need to activate the Blaze plan or pay as you go. And the pricing is based on these 3 things. So duration, how much duration, like the execution time of your functions, and then the invocation count, so how many times the functions are called, and resource provisioning, so how much resources does your function actually need. And to give you an idea of how much this could be for your use case, these are some things you can try. So they have free tier, so you can just try it for free for a few months, but up to a certain point. So it's like there's a limit of how much free you get it, but like you can just try it out just for free at the beginning. There are good pricing examples on the Firebase documentation, so you can see like different pricing examples over there, and then you can see there is a price calculator. So Firebase has this price calculator, so you can go in and put in the amount that you think your functions might use, and then you can see the result over there. Okay, so now you see, okay, we got this far, where to go from here. So one of the things that I suggest you to do is that to try other Firebase triggers, such as cloud storage, authentication. There is a lot of other triggers you can try out. You can unit test your functions. I mean, testing is very important, especially on the server, because then it's like affects a lot. I mean, not especially on server, like also in iOS as well. So it's not, but you can do unit tests. And then you can run functions on a schedule. What it means is that, so for instance, if you have something that you want to run every day, every week, then you can use Cloud Functions for that. One pro tip here is that, at least the last time I checked, the schedule functions did not work on emulator, even though it turns on and it says, oh, like the schedule function is on, but it doesn't work, and you have to deploy it to work. I don't know if they fixed that. There are some workarounds around it, but I couldn't make it work, and it was like a few very frustrating days because the code was very simple, and then I deployed it, and then it worked. So just a pro tip over there. And you can add security rules to your Cloud Functions using app check and like other security methods. And so me and Peter did a tutorial on, made a doxy tutorial for Cloud Functions. This is what we made for an App DevCon workshop. So if any of you want to try it out, scan this QR code. There is a very detailed doxy tutorial which covers a lot of the things that I already said, but also some other things. It will basically walk you through different things that you can do with Cloud Functions, how to set it up and how to write different functions. And I'm going to move forward. And so this is like a final slide kind of sentence that, so next time you're in a situation that you're like really depend on a backend work and you desperately need someone to do it for you, then maybe just be your own savior and just do it with Cloud Functions. And by saying that, that's it.